This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Welcome to The Edge, Trek FM's dedicated podcast that talks about Star Trek Discovery. I'm your host, Brandon-Shea Mutala. Amy has been transposed to the Mirror universe, and she is not able to join us today. Not even Mirror Amy. So I am flying solo, and joining me today is a couple of wonderful guests, some good friends of mine, and the people that I donate my money to Trek FM for. Dan Gunther and Bruce Gibson of Literary Treks, my favorite podcast on the network. How you doing, gentlemen?
Hey, not too bad. Wow. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us on our favorite podcast. Is this live from the Edge?
This is
That's
not
what I'm
live
used to
from the
doing.
Edge.
Okay.
It is really too bad we had to send Mirror Amy to the brig, but you know she was really carrying on something fierce. So
she'll logic herself out of there soon.
Well, I know why she's not here, because Brandon was eating right before the show, and it was not a pleasant sight.
It was just chicken and spaghetti.
I know, and it was loud. You're a loud eater, especially when you scratch the fork on the plate.
Hey, don't blame me for your computer settings.
That's true.
Anywho, we're not here to talk about spaghetti and chicken. We're here to talk about Star Trek Discovery, and we've actually got some news, groundbreaking news. We are probably the first people to talk about it, but you guys are going to be like the last people that you're going to hear about it, because we're talking about this on April 9th when the news dropped, but this episode's not going to be dropping till April 20th, so every other podcast will have already released it. But we're talking about the news that Captain Pike has been cast, and he's been cast by Anson Mount, and this is pretty interesting. I was talking with Dan before we started recording, and Anson Mount, I'm like, I don't know who this guy is, who is he? And Dan starts listing off these shows, and he's like, oh, he's in Hell on Wheels, and I'm like, what? So I took a look at it, and I'm like, it is him. He's got a haircut. So, I watched Hell on Wheels. I've seen it all except for the last season, and he does a really good job in that show. So I think this is a pretty interesting choice for Pike. And, seeing him in his role as Bohannon on Hell on Wheels, I think he would be a great choice for this role. Are you guys familiar with his work at all? Bruce, do you know him?
I do not know him. I'm not familiar with his work, but I saw his headshot, and he looks like he could be a Captain Pike, and I'm just excited that they decided to move forward with us seeing the crew, or at least someone, at least the captain in this case, of the Enterprise in Discovery, and not shy away from it. So that's very encouraging to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Dan, how about you? Have you seen any of his work?
I've never actually seen anything he's been in. Interestingly enough, I think it was a couple months ago, a couple people that I talked to about Star Trek Online said, you know who would be a really good Captain Pike? This Anson Mount guy. And I was like, oh yeah, he kind of looks like the part. And now, a few months later, here we are, and they've actually cast him. So there's at least a few people out there that are really excited about this. And TrekCore.com posted some headshots, I noticed, kind of side-by-side comparisons. And yeah, I think he's got the look. I think he can pull this off. And I don't know, seems like a pretty solid choice to me. So
excellent, right on. Well, I'm excited about that. I'm excited for the possibility of, world building. Like they have the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Maybe we can get the Trek television universe, I guess, and we can really dive in. It's one of those things I've mentioned on previous episodes, back when they came out with Insurrection, why didn't they have a Dominion War movie? Like they wanted to keep it separate. And I think in today's day and age, we might get the possibility of some spin-off shows where things take place. I don't necessarily want to see an Enterprise show, a Starship Enterprise show that takes place at this time, but we could have this as a launching point for a television universe, and I think that's pretty cool. I think this means that if we're seeing him, we're probably going to see a number one, Una.
I hope so.
You guys want her? They got to call her Una, right?
They have to.
Yeah.
See, when those things happen, does that make the books more canon for you?
Not really. Yeah.
Well, no, for me, it's cool because I love it when something in the books becomes canon. So if they refer to her as Una in the show, that's like really cool to me because it's like, look, see, they took something from the books.
So for the listeners that probably don't know what we're talking about here, there was a trilogy of novels that came out for the 50th anniversary of the original series by Greg Cox, David Mack, and Dayton Ward and Kevin Delmore. And in that trilogy of books, they primarily focused on the character number one, and she was given the name Una. So,
which was used in Desperate Hours, the first Discovery novel, too.
Yes, it was, yeah. Oh, so I guess people would, that's for sure. People would recognize that as well. So, so that was carried over from a previous book series as well. Right. So I think that'd be kind of cool if we had something like that. I can't help but think that that's got to be a gigantic nod of the head to Una McCormick, right? But, that's what I thought as soon as I read it the first time. But
well, maybe they will cast Una McCormick as number one.
I love it. That would
Very
be great.
Cool.
So
one of the things that I noticed about this too is Anson Mount posted, a personal message saying like, yeah, the secret's out. I'm now cast as Captain Pike. In that message, he did mention that, he had some really cool first experiences, and one of them was sitting down in the captain's chair for the first time. Ooh. So does that mean, like, this could mean a number of things? Do we get some Enterprise interiors next season on Discovery? Will we see the Enterprise bridge?
We're definitely going to see the Enterprise bridge. He might have sat on the Discovery's chair.
Yeah, like it might have been publicity photos, that kind of thing, on the Discovery chair or something like that. But I prefer to hope and think that we will get Enterprise interiors. So.
Even I sat on the Discovery chair at FTLV. so maybe this guy went to a convention and sat in the chair.
Yes, I think I saw many people's profile photos around that time of year were them sitting in the captain's chair. And I think Robert Reyes still has his profile picture with him on the chair. There's a few people that do, so wonderful. I missed out. I didn't get a chance to sit in the chair, but that's okay.
Yeah, me too.
But
we're not bitter.
Another piece of Discovery news that we have, for those that don't know, there was an annual comic that's been recently released, and the story itself is about 40 pages. I'm hoping that we can cover it on a future episode. We don't have time today to cover it. We are on a bit of a time crunch. I apologize for the last couple of episodes. At the end last week, it sounded abrupt, like we were cutting off Amy, but we were really in a time crunch last week because one of us had to go. And this week we're in a time crunch as well. It's a difficult being in Saskatchewan because we don't have daylight savings time in Saskatchewan. So everybody else's hours have changed, but mine haven't. So I'm still getting off at the same time, but now I got to try and fit my podcasts earlier. So I apologize for the time crunch, listeners, and I appreciate your patience on that. But we want to talk about a future episode, but in a nutshell, it is a Stamets story, and it does talk about him leading up to getting onto the onto the Starship Discovery. So it's a very good book. It's a very good comic. Highly recommend it. Check it out, because we're hopefully going to cover it on a future episode, and get you guys back to talk about it.
And we just talked about Literary Treks, I think it's 325.
Yeah, I listened to the start because I'd read the comic, but I'm going to start the novel tomorrow, so I haven't had a chance to read the book yet. But
the Voyager novel that we covered also on that episode,
which is also by Kirsten Beyer. So
yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's move into our main topic, which just happens to be another novel. And we're going to be talking about the latest Star Trek Discovery novel today, Drastic Measures. Now, you might be saying, what? This isn't Literary Treks. And it's not, but we do have the Literary Treks gentleman on to talk about the book. But we're going to be taking a bit of a different approach when we talk about the books here on The Edge. We're only talking about the Discovery novels. And we're going to be primarily putting a focus on the books and what do we learn from the characters in the book, and how can we apply it to the show? Because while these books themselves are not canon, they are created in conjunction with the show. And Kirsten Beyer herself, like, her primary duties, if I understand it, are to directly relate the media tie-in fiction into the show. She is a staff writer as well, and she did write episode 8, CV Pashcum Parabellum. But
Nice.
her primary duties are to tie the fiction into the show as well. And so if you guys want to listen, there's a fascinating interview with the author, Dayton Ward, which was released just, I guess, about a month and a half ago by the time this drops. Do you guys happen to know the Literary Tricks number off the top of your head?
222.
222, exactly.
So they have an interview with Dayton Ward. He talks about the book, and he talks about the process and how he wrote it, and, you know, some of the constraints that he had, and when he learned certain, you know, things, like when did he learn that Lorca was from the Mirror Universe, and, you know, even who did he think was going to be Lorca, and how did he have to write him. So it's a really good interview. I definitely recommend it. So
yeah, and speaking of canon, just so you know, I mean, the show writers and the writers of the books are all trying to approach the books as if they are canon. And the writers of this TV series have even said, you know, we'll try not to step on anything in the novels and try to keep it as canon as we possibly can, or as consistent, to not step on something or contradict anything in the novels. But if we have to, we will, but we'll try not to. So both parties are trying to keep them as canon as possible.
Yeah. But if they have to tell the ultimate story where Lorca dies on Tarsus 4, then they're going to, like, Prime Lorca dies on Tarsus 4, they're going to tell that story.
Right.
You know,
Right.
So,
Exactly.
and the reason
But
we
they'll try
mentioned,
not to.
yeah, and the reason we mentioned Tarsus 4 is because this book takes place during the events that were mentioned in the original series season 1 episode called The Conscience of the King. And this event refers to this episode refers to something from Captain Kirk's youth, where Governor Kodos, who later labeled Kodos the Executioner, came to power, and they had a famine because of a plague. That this fungus wiped out a whole bunch of food. So rather than have people starve to death, because apparently the Federation was months away, they were going to be at least a month before they got there, people would have starved. So instead of letting them starve to death, he decided to kill half the population of the planet. And so he wound them all up into a baseball stadium or something like that and killed half the people. And then the Federation showed up and said, "Hey, we're here. How's it going? Here's some food." And they're all like, "Uh-oh." And then
Lorca.
Yeah.
Lorca is the one who shows up.
Yeah. So first question I have for you guys is, what do you think about tying it into this event? And do you think that's important for Discovery, having this event? I don't think we're going to come back. I don't think we're going to see it. But what do you guys think about the Tarsus 4 event itself? Dan?
Well, I think any time, you know, the tie-in fiction can kind of more closely align itself with what we know of Star Trek history and kind of flesh out something that maybe we know a little bit about it, but don't know a lot more about. I think that makes that event A, more meaningful, and also B, I don't really want to use the word legitimize, because I don't think Discovery needs to be legitimized as part of the Star Trek universe, but it ties it more closely and places it in the timeline of where it is in relation to the original series. And just the idea that all these things are going on, it's a shared universe, you know, it's not its own little pocket. What happens in Tarsus 4 affects, you know, the characters going forward in Discovery just as it affects Kirk and Riley and the other characters in the original series. I think anything that ties those together, and it just makes it more meaningful to me, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Dan. And I think that's one of the things that Dayton Ward even said, and I think David Mack alluded to the same thing, is like, this is an opportunity to kind of bridge events from what we've known of the different Star Trek series, in this case TOS, to Discovery, which isn't always something easily done on a TV series on Discovery. And I didn't think it needs to be done. I don't think we needed it to tie to this event. This event has been covered in some other books, but it really helped to enrich it because we can relate to that event, and we're getting not just insight into the event that we may not have gotten elsewhere, but we're getting more insight into these Discovery characters at the same time. So it's a blend of two different worlds all into one, and I really enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was interesting because I just finished reading Collision Course by William Shatner. And, the Tarsus 4 events tie in very heavily into that novel as well. And so it was interesting to read that and this kind of back to back. It was almost back to back that I read them. And then, of course, it's mentioned in the novel Avatar, which is another William Shatner novel. And it's also mentioned in, there's one more book. What am I forgetting here? It just had it off the top of my head. There's another book that deals with Tarsus 4.
Well, there's the autobiography of James T. Kirk.
Thank you. That was it. Yeah. The autobiography of James T. Kirk has a chapter that deals with that as well. And in Avatar, it was this whole plot line with, young Sarek was on the planet and everything. And there's all this crazy stuff going on. But that's part of the William Shatner.
Avenger, yeah.
Yeah. Or Avenger, not Avatar. Avenger. Thank you. Was the third book of the first trilogy of Shatner Bond books. So,
but all those books you're talking about, they pretty much work together. There's not much that contradicts one or the other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some stuff with the last one, Collision Course, that happens in Collision Course that doesn't happen in this, and I won't spoil that. Listeners, if you do want to read that, it's going to be on an upcoming episode of Literary Treks in the future here. But there are some events that are very different in that book, and things that Kodos does, but I don't know. I found it interesting that they chose this event. It is such a important event that isn't really addressed very much. I mean, we don't hear of it any other time in the run of the show. We don't ever hear it mentioned except for this one episode. It is only brought up in the fiction universe, which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. And so what we have is, Georgiou is a commander on a ship. She's kind of in between missions right now. And the ship that she's on, being transported on, gets called to Tarsus 4 because they're the closest and they're actually able to get there quicker. And, one of the interesting things that I found about this is, one of the interesting plot points was that, look, they didn't tell Tarsus 4 that there was a Federation ship as close as it was for security reasons, because they couldn't let them know where this ship was, in relation to Tarsus 4 because of the secret mission it was on before. And they don't really talk about that mission. But I think that's really interesting because, that lack of information is what leads to this catastrophe on the planet. So I really liked that aspect of the book, and I thought that was really kind of fascinating. So, what did you guys think of that? And what did you guys think of the Georgiou plotline with her on the ship coming to the planet?
Yeah, this was definitely an interesting aspect, and what compounds that, of course, is the colony of Tarsus 4, when it's taken over by Kodos, actually cuts off all communication as well, so that, people can't alert the Federation and Starfleet what's going on there. So even at the time that Starbase 11 is trying to contact them and say, we do have something closer now on the way, don't ask us how, but we do, but they can't even do that. So it's one of these things that, a decision is made and you don't think that it'll have all these repercussions, but when someone else gets that information or lack of information and does something with it and makes a decision themselves, it just shows the snowballing effect. And obviously, ultimately, Kodos is responsible for what happened. I mean, he's the one that implemented it, but there's all these little decisions that get made beforehand that show this to be a really complex, evolving situation. And I like that it's not just this one aspect, and that it grows out of this whole muddled mess,
Yeah, because, Kodos executes half the people there, and we need to give him a reason why to do it. And if there's no communication, and if he feels like there's no hope, what a great way then to bring Georgiou into this. Because now when she shows up as being that hope, thinking that she's coming to the rescue to help them, and then she finds this, I mean, you're just throwing Georgiou in this great storyline where it's really testing her character and what she has to do with Kodos and with all the people there and the sacrifices that were made. And it's a really intriguing way of giving her some complexity that I'd like to see explored in the series that refers to that event. Like maybe she would, of course, she's passed away, but maybe there's something that's revealed in the series that refers to this event and how she had to deal with it and why she made decisions later in her career the way she did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Giorgio, I think, just gets so much more complexity with this story. And it's really too bad that we only got 2 episodes with the Prime Giorgio, because even in those 2 episodes, I think she's a fantastic character. And I love that we delve a little bit deeper into her here and in the other novel as well.
Mm-hmm. So what is it that you think we learn about Giorgio's character here? What extra depth do you think we get that can help define this character that we only got for 2 episodes?
Well, I think it kind of reinforces the impression that I got of her character. And like when I watched the 2-part series opener for Discovery, I kind of felt that she was a captain along the same lines of Picard, kind of a diplomatic, more thoughtful captain than maybe Kirk was. And this one here, we see her thrust into a situation where there's a lot going on and there's a lot that has to be done, but she maintains this very level-headed approach to it. And we do see her inner thoughts and stuff. And at times, of course, she is very moved and very disturbed by what she sees. But at the same time, she establishes command and has this kind of base morality, ethics, I guess, that when in dealing with it, and she never really seems to waver far off of that line. She's kind of one of those very thoughtful, very strong captains, if that makes sense. Whereas Kirk might make some impassioned speech and get really angry about something. And I love Kirk, but he's a little bit more cowboy diplomacy, right? But I feel Giorgio is very much in the Picard vein of captains, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I don't feel like I really learned that much more of her. I mean, the impression I got of her in the 2-part episode, the first 2 episodes, is pretty much the same impression I get from this novel. Nothing changed about her except I know just where she was 10 years earlier. I knew where she was in her career. If anything, probably the biggest thing I got out of it is just confirmation that I know what her character is like from what I got from those episodes. And 2, that she really was on a command track. She felt ready, and she was ready to advance in this novel. So she did feel like an up-and-coming captain. If not already, she had all the skills to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that, because one of the scenes that I really liked with Giorgio was, it was near, I don't know, about 2/3 of the way through the book, I guess, when she's talking with Lorca and asking him about, whether or not he's compromised because of what's going on, and he's being abrupt with her, and just her reaction to it is a very captainly response, so it just flushes out and gives this character that we didn't get a lot of time with a little bit more of this character. Right. And, one of the things that I had trouble with George's character in the show is for those 2 episodes, I didn't buy that those people had been there for 7 years in those 2 episodes, that they'd been working together for 7 years. Just some of the dialogue didn't feel like dialogue that people would have after 7 years, and this felt different. And the other book, which we'll hopefully get to talk about later on, feels more like they have been working together for a longer period of time. So I think that's one of the benefits of a novel, and that you're able to, flush it out a little bit more. You get some internal dialogue for a character, or internal monologue for a character and whatnot.
So maybe there should be a novel that shows that they were on a break for like 6 months or a year, and they just got back together again right before the first episode, and that's why they didn't feel as chummy as you would want them to feel.
Giorgio just got back from orbital skydiving at Bajor.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah, she had to use up all 6 months of her leave, and yeah, I like it. And then she had to solve a murder case while she was there, and there was octopus under the Bajoran Ocean, and we're referring to other William Shatner novels while we talk here. Now, we're going to move on to Lorca here, primarily because while Giorgio and Lorca are basically given equal screen time in this book, this does really feel like a Lorca book. And I know that when he was given the assignment, when Dayton Ward was given the assignment to write the book, they said, do a Lorca novel. And he's like, well, I want to do a Giorgio novel. And they're like, and Paula Block said, do both. So he did combine them, but this does feel more like a Lorca book. And I think primarily because of the twist that we find out in the show that Lorca's from the Mirror universe. So I think that's why, for me, the book itself has more of an emphasis on the Lorca character for myself. Do you guys get that? Or do you guys think it's more 50-50? Do you think it's more one or the other? What do you guys think, Dan?
I feel like there was a nice balance. I do think that part of the reason that I feel like maybe there's more of a focus on Lorca is because, and it's a weird situation with this novel, because this is the only time in Star Trek we've actually dealt with the Lorca that is from the Prime universe. Mm-hmm. So Lorca in the Discovery series is the Mirror universe Lorca, having crossed over and taken over the life of the Prime Lorca. So in this novel, this is all we get so far in Star Trek Discovery, anything of who the real Lorca is. So I can understand kind of the temptation, and I don't know, it'd be interesting to see the actual, ratio of time devoted in this book to each character. But I would totally understand the motivation of the author to maybe focus a little bit more on Lorca, because there's a lot more building to do there, because like I said, this is the first we see of this character.
Mm-hmm. Bruce?
Yeah, I think Lorca, I think of this a little more as a Lorca book and not a Giorgio book. And I think one reason is because that this is the first time we've seen Prime Lorca. So when Dayton was writing this book, he had scripts from the series, so he knew the Lorca in the series was not the Prime Lorca, but the Mirror Lorca. So he didn't have anything to go off of on the Prime Lorca. So he basically wrote the Prime Lorca as just being almost like the Mirror Lorca. And that's what I was very interested in when I was reading the book. I wanted to see how this character was going to be portrayed. And he felt like the Mirror Lorca, maybe not to the extreme we saw when we didn't know he was Mirror Lorca in the series. This character felt like that, maybe not to the extreme the Lorca did in that series, but he is very, cutting edge and almost like a warrior, and is going to break the rules, but just a little tamer than what we saw in the TV series. So I thought that worked really well. And so that's what stood out to me, because we were exploring a character that we haven't met yet. And so that stood out to me, as opposed to Giorgio, where it's the character we've already met her. We already know her. And the relationship between the two, she did feel more like a captain to me, and Lorca is still finding his groove, still finding his command style in this book. So I felt that there was more room for that character to grow than what we saw from Giorgio.
Mm-hmm. See, that's interesting, because I almost felt like this character was a bit more extreme than the Lorca we saw in the show, because of, some of his internal monologue that he had and the responses that he had when Giorgio confronted him. So in the book, what happens is he's met a woman on Tarsus 4, and she ends up being one of the people that die in the 4000. And when Giorgio confronts him about this and learns about it and learns he's been compromised, he's very abrupt, and he's saying, yeah, basically, I don't care if he dies. I'm not going to go out of my way to kill him. But if I have to kill him, I'm not going to be sad about it. And that scene that he has at the end of the book, confronting his anger in the gym, like he beats the heck out of this robot machine thing, this robot boxing machine. And they're like, I didn't think you could, there's witnesses that are watching it. They're like, I didn't think you could do that to one of these things. Right. And while I understand that's grief and rage and anger for the event that happened, I got the impression that this guy might be a little bit more aggressive than the Lorca we saw in the show. However, he was very similar to the Lorca we saw in the show. And while I was reading it, I was thinking about Landry. Because Landry is basically identical, both versions of her that we see, and there's almost no change. And so I think that's really interesting that we've got these two characters that are so similar. So, Dayton Ward did an amazing job. I mean, he was writing this before the character was acting, and he really did capture Lorca. I mean, in the interview that you guys had with him, he's like, I don't know who was playing him when I started writing it, right? And so I don't know how that affected when he finally, and how far along in the process he was when he learned these things. I mean, he kind of talks about it in the interview here. I don't want to spoil everything, so go check out the interview. But, it's really interesting that he's able to capture the voice of Lorca so well, primarily from scripts.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, he does do it very well. I would say, to me, he is very driven in this novel. And of course, to me, I think the difference would be he's driven to these extremes out of compassion for, the person that he's lost. And, that's obviously clouded his judgment a little bit. Whereas, the Mirror Lorca is out for power. So, I kind of like that idea of mirror universe characters where they're basically kind of the same person, but maybe with just a slight moral inversion, or the idea that their circumstances have dictated what their goal in life is, if that makes sense. So, they're both very driven. They're both very, they're men of action for sure. But the Mirror Lorca wants to take over the Empire and kill all the alien influences and that kind of thing. Whereas our Lorca, sees it as bringing this man to justice is, his primary motivation here.
That's so good, Dan.
Like they're very similar people. They are. Yeah. Just life has dictated differences.
In Mirror Broken, the TNG comic series that takes place in the Mirror Universe, and we've commented that on the show. It's a lot of ways they seem like the same characters we see in TNG. It's not just an evil version of that character. It seems like the same character, but the circumstances are different, and the motivation therefore is different. And I think that's the same thing in this novel as in what you're saying, Dan. It's like the motivation behind Lorca in here is different than the motivation we're getting in the TV series with what we thought was Prime Lorca, but Mirror Lorca. But I think that if this Lorca, and I don't know, if this Lorca survived and the Mirror Lorca didn't replace him and we got to the TV series, I think he would have been very similar, but less conniving and a little less of an edge maybe to him.
Yeah, all of the things that the Mirror Lorca was pretending to do. Right. They would be the things that our Lorca actually was doing. Would actually be trying to find out the Defiant information to try and get back to our Prime universe and all that stuff. Although they wouldn't have gotten trapped there in the first... I don't know. It's confusing now.
See, if I didn't know about the Baran event, right, I would have thought that this was the Mirror Lorca. And, this could have been the Mirror Lorca all this time, even. If I didn't know about that, I would probably say that this could be the same character. So, I think it's interesting here. The other aspect I have about the book here is it's kind of a vague question. It's just opinion for you guys here. How do you guys feel, and what do you think is the importance of having, I don't know, not the importance, how do you guys feel about having a book where we know as the fans that the resolution in the book is not the resolution, because we know what happens to Kodos. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to have this book. I mean, if you're coming to Discovery for the first time and this is all that you know, then spoilers for the TOS episode. Well, I guess no, because they even talk about it in the book. Kodos leaves the planet. Kodos lives. Somebody else is killed in his stead. And it's like, well, that's almost anticlimactic for me, because it's like this whole time I'm reading this book, I know that they're not going to get Kodos, and Lorca is on this mad pursuit to catch him and find him, but I know that he's not going to do it because we know about the burnt corpse. We know that it's not his. So, how did that affect your guys' opinion of the book while you were reading it? Bruce, let's start with you.
It didn't bother me because I think I was just so focused on the Giorgio and Lorca characters that I didn't really care about the resolution and what was going on with Kodos as much, except that I was interested to see how they would play off the fact that they thought he was dead, but he wasn't. And they how are they going to answer how that occurred, especially with DNA testing and it was discovered that, he burnt to a crisp, or they thought he did and they couldn't do the DNA scan or whatever. Yeah, there was all of that involved. So I guess it's almost, I don't mind getting into a story or knowing the resolution if I'm following different characters and see how they're going to deal with the situation. So it didn't bother me.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Dan?
Yeah, I feel very much the same way. It was kind of one thing that I was really interested in when I started this book, was how they're going to handle that. And I found myself throughout the book kind of trying to figure out, how's he going to get away? Like, they're really closing in on him here. I know he gets away. How does he do it? Kind of thing. So that kind of added an extra bit of an enjoyment. But also, the books, they aren't primarily about the plot. The plot is the framework that the characterizations and that sort of thing is built around. So I can enjoy the Xindi arc in season 3 of Enterprise, knowing that Earth isn't going to get destroyed by the Xindi superweapon, but when all's said and done.
Well, I guess for me, it's like you could read a book about Kennedy, but Kennedy's going to get shot at the end, but you're still interested to see how it got there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about how these events affect these characters. And, as I say, coming to it from the two different angles, I think there's a lot in this book for both camps, the people who know how it ends and the people who don't. There's enough there to create enjoyment for both of those groups, if that makes sense.
I mean, it almost sounds to me, Brandon, that you wish they would maybe stayed away from the story.
I don't know. And I like Dan, what he brought up there. But before I go into that, I'm going to go on a little tangent. Bruce, you need to read 11/22/63 by Stephen King, because it's amazing.
Yes.
There's a really bonkers plot point right at the start of the book that it's time travel related and Kennedy assassination related and whatnot. How the time travel occurs is completely ludicrous. But once you get past that and you get into the book is absolutely amazing, and I think it's one of Stephen King's best books. Now, going back to Dan, I really like your example of using Enterprise Season 3, because yes, we know that they're not going to destroy Earth in this season, so that is actually a very good comparison. And even watching it the first time, you know that there's not going to destroy Earth, because we have Earth in season 1 of the original Star Trek series, right? So, we know that Earth's not going to get destroyed. So,
which is why the beginning of the episode Twilight is so dang good. But anyway.
Right. Excellent. No, I didn't mind it. I was going into it intrigued, but I mean, as I was getting in the climax, and I'm like, well, I know he's not going to catch him. So that was it was only as I was reading it, I didn't think about that as before I started the book. I'm like, oh, cool. I really want to check out this event, because I love the idea of this event in Kirk's past. And I think that Conscious of the King is a great episode. And I love the world building that we get for Kirk's history in that episode. And for the couple of times that it's been touched on in literary fiction, I was looking forward to getting this book about it. But while I was reading it near the end, I'm like, well, I know they're not going to catch him. Why am I reading this? But yeah, I guess I like your point, Andy. I should definitely take a look at it that way and think about it again. But I'm okay with that. So the last question I have on the characters here, before we wrap up with our final thoughts, is even Lorca. Did we learn anything about Lorca? Is there anything that we got out of this book that we can apply to Lorca when the Lorca that we have in the show isn't this person?
It's a good question, because like we've said, they are very similar. The Lorca that we meet in this book and the Mirror Lorca. I think, and again, the show has no obligation to go with this characterization of Lorca. Maybe he's a complete pacifist that would never dream of picking up a phaser or something,
Yeah.
But if they do follow this characterization, I think it's interesting to know how similar he is to the Lorca of the Mirror Universe. And honestly, I don't think Jason Isaacs could play a different... he always is very intense and very driven. And I hope that the writers of the show look back at this, if the Prime Lorca has a role to play.
Exactly, because we could never see this character ever.
This could be maybe we'll just get a bunch of Lorca books and that's it. But yeah,
the Starfleet Academy Lorca series.
I'd read it.
I'm not too sure about that. I mean, I think there's been little hints of the possibility of Prime Lorca actually did live and survive. Now, I don't care really either way, which way they go with it, and I'm not necessarily hoping that they bring Prime Lorca back, but I'm not even saying that they're going to, but we could see Prime Lorca later in the series. So, and if that's the case, then even this book becomes more relevant to me, because now it actually is about a character that we will see later in the series. But regardless of that, if Prime Lorca lived, and I think I mentioned this earlier, I think he would have acted in a similar way on Discovery as we saw in the series. Maybe not make certain decisions because the Mirror Lorca had different motivation to do certain things, but in a lot of ways they are the same character. And who's to know that what we saw with Prime Lorca in this novel didn't happen in the Mirror Universe with the Mirror Universe Lorca?
So you think possibly the Mirror Universe Lorca was also on the Tarsus 4 there?
Possibly. Could be.
Yeah. I wonder how that would have played out, like, because I was thinking along those lines too, like what event did Mirror Lorca have in his past? And would they have had a Tarsus 4 on their side? So it's kind of interesting. The last thing we'll touch on here before we give our final thoughts is the credit cookie that we've got in the book here. So eagle-eyed viewers may have missed it. It got out on Facebook pretty quickly and Twitter and whatnot. But if you go right to the end, you read the acknowledgments, you read the about biography and everything like that. The last 3 or 4 pages of the book is a little epilogue, a little credit cookie. And we don't know who it is. They don't say who it is. They don't say what's going on. The only thing that they strongly imply that this is our Prime Lorca held captive in the Mirror Universe, because there's strong implications that that's where he is. They don't say, he doesn't know how he got there. He just knows that there's this militaristic humans that are there, and he has something on him that leads back into the book that lets us know that it is the same character here. So they definitely leave the door open, in my opinion, for an explanation for how Mirror Lorca or how Prime Lorca survived later on. So I think that's a pretty interesting little way to end the book, and hats off to Dayton for that. I think it's pretty cool. So
yeah, because they can go in any direction. So if the series does go and reveal that the Prime Lorca lived, well, then we got a little hint to that. But I don't even think if they had decided they were going to do that, if they today said, yes, we had made that decision and we told Dayton about it and he could give a hint, I don't know if they would want him to give a hint or not. I'm not really sure. Or if it's just Dayton's way of, well, if they bring him back, I kind of establish that. If they do bring him back in a different way, it wasn't the Mirror Universe, I didn't necessarily say this was him. He could just spin it any way you want. It could be him, it could not be him. He could be in the Mirrorverse, it could not be. I don't know. It's just a little tease at the end. And maybe once this Discovery is off the air, when the series is done and they're given more free reign to do other things in Discovery novels, Dayton can come back to that and give a whole story that takes place after that epilogue.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could totally follow it up. Mirror Universe Prime Lorca Adventures.
I'd read it.
Me too. I might even talk about it on the podcast.
Excellent. Right on.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us today on The Edge, talking about this book. Again, for deeper analysis on the book and an interview with the author himself, please go to episode 222 of Literary Treks. Just came out just a little while ago. And pick up the book if you haven't read it. I don't think we spoiled too much in the book here. We spoiled a couple things, but there's still lots to find in the book. I definitely recommend it. Do you have any final thoughts, any other things on the book that you want to talk about before we give you guys just contact information? Is there anything else you found that was really fascinating in the book that helped to enhance your appreciation of the show?
I think just kind of what I said at the top, that, tying it into a particular event in Star Trek history, I think even just for that little bit of connective tissue, it's worth reading for that alone. I will also say that little scene at the very end of the novel, if you're listening to the audiobook, it is literally after everything. It's after like the acknowledgements, the credits, everything. And then there's this little scene at the end. So it really is kind of like the Marvel movie, post-credit scene of a Star Trek book, which is really cool. So I hope they go with it. I hope something comes of it. I don't know. I'm in the camp that, man, I would love to see Jason Isaacs on the show again. So, yeah.
Yeah, who wouldn't? Yeah. I think the one thing about this novel is just really cool to see Lorca and Giorgio work together on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't really get that in the series. They're either not together, or at the end we get them as mirror people to each other or fighting each other, but not necessarily the Prime versions of each working on a mission together. So it's just neat to see that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Right on. Well, Bruce, where can people find you when you're not trying to save people from starving to death from a fungus?
Well, you can see me eating the food that I didn't give to the starving people. No. You can find me on Literary Treks with Dan, of course. We mentioned that earlier. And, of course, when Discovery is releasing new episodes, I'm here on Live from the Edge with Brandy Jacola and or Jackola. She doesn't care which way it's pronounced, but I'm told it's Jacola is the correct pronunciation, even though I can't talk right now. And then I'm talking Star Wars on the Star Wars Report podcast. And of course, I'm on Twitter at Admiral_Rex and in the Babel Conference as always.
Dan, where can people find you when you're not pulling secret messages out of your shirt?
Well, sometimes I post pictures of those secret messages in the form of Chinese fortune cookie strips on Instagram.
I thought you were going to say you post pictures of what's under your shirt.
No, I do not have a burgeoning modeling career. Thankfully, for all of you out there, I'm saving you from that. But yeah, as Bruce mentioned, Literary Treks, we talk about Star Trek books and comics here on the network. I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kurtrats Productions, and I'm on Twitter at Kurtrats, that's Kertrats, and in the Babel Conference, talking about Star Trek.
Excellent. Right on. Thanks, guys. I love Literary Treks. Keep up the great work. I'm eagerly anticipating listening to the Kirsten Beyer interview that was just released yesterday. So, but I got to read the book first, So,
it's worth it. It's a good one.
I know. I eagerly anticipate it. She's really good. She's definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, and you're going to be on here shortly, too, on Literary Treks.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a Deep Space Nine novel, which is interesting. We're going to be talking about a Deep Space Nine novel called Fallen Heroes, which is one of the earliest ones. And I haven't read it since it first came out. And when I read it the first time, I'm like, this book is amazing. And I just read on the Star Trek books group, somebody read it and he's like, man, this book did not hold up at all. He's like,
oh no.
So I'm like, oh no. Uh-oh. So hopefully it still holds up. I remember when it came out, like it was big news because, it's not even a spoiler. It's the book where everybody dies, and then there's time travel in the book and whatnot, right? But I remember it was a pretty good read back when I was a teenager. So excellent, right on. Well, Desperate Drastic Measure Hours. Which book did we read?
Drastic Measures.
It's not the only thing we've been talking about here on the network. So take a listen to this clip and see what else you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
She is going to be one of the greatest comedic stars of this century. She is going to be amazing, and I love her. She's hilarious. But Tilly has become solely comedic relief in this episode, and Tilly is not just comedic relief. She is smart. Tilly is a smart person. She knows her job. She is going to be one of the greatest captains in Starfleet. I believe that.
Warp 5.
Wait, hold on. You don't have a reflection. There's beams of light traversing the ship, cutting you. And my lack of logic is what's astounding here?
Yeah, because you made an assumption based on zero evidence.
Except for the fact that they just melted.
Yeah, the three that we've seen, we don't know what the rest of them are doing. This is the first one. We don't know if
it was anymore.
Okay, let's scan the melting.
Earl Grey.
But yes, I was a huge Star Trek fan. Never in my life ever imagined that I would ever appear or meet some of those fabulous people on that show. Never thought, and meet Gene Roddenberry. I never thought I would ever meet. Most of my life, I never thought would happen. So I feel very, very fortunate.
The 602 Club.
And it really speaks to me, Halliday's ego even, of I'm going to make everyone love what I love, and then that's how they'll win the contest. And it's sad that it feels like it all became that, what you're saying, Matt, of everyone not even having the creativity to have their own stuff anymore. It's all about what Halliday was interested in. And then I think, too, it really also could be even a commentary about greed in society now, that everything really revolved around wanting to get his fortune. So they did all the research they had to do because they just wanted the money.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, please be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and a written review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place is to join in the larger conversation in the Babel Conference, which is our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, that's Babel, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select The Edge. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Brandon-Shea. You can find me here on the network with another show called Warp 5, which is our Star Trek Enterprise podcast. You can find me over on the Fandom Podcast Network, with my friends Chris and Tom, and we have a show called Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast. And we're going through Hitch's films one at a time. And, I may have something on the horizon coming, so stay tuned for that news. And it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. So be sure to eagerly anticipate your Twitter feeds to see what may be coming. My friend Amy, who is the co-host here on the show, she's just away for this week. She was unable to make it, but she will be back. You can find her on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson. And you can find her every week co-hosting Earl Grey, which is our Star Trek The Next Generation podcast here on the network. And she'd love to hear from you, so send her a tweet. If you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more. Available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, and we really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. And at this time, we would like to give a huge thank you and a huge pat on the back to our wonderful associate producers here on The Edge. We have Norman Seelau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Puleo, Lisa Slack, Shoaib Mirza, Richard Rutledge, James Muldrow, and Cornelia Reutner. Thank you guys so much for supporting The Edge as well as the network as a whole. Well, that's all we got for you this week, so be sure to tune in next time to find out what we've been doing on the edge of Federation space.